Hello there and welcome to Planet America's Fireside Chat. I'm John Barron.
And I'm Chad Ciccadillo.
We have a very special guest for you this week, the former governor who challenged Donald Trump for the Republican nomination in 2020. Bill Weld is with us. He's also a former assistant US Attorney General, so he'll have plenty of fascinating stuff to say on Trump's looming trials.
And some good news for Americans who are paying sky-high prices for a range of life-saving drugs. They're going to get a whole lot cheaper, although it might take a little bit of time. Sorry. But first,
one of the ringleaders of the January 6, 2021 attack on the United States Capitol has been sentenced to 22 years behind bars. Enrique Tarrio, the former head of the far-right militia group the Proud Boys, was a central figure organising the pro-Trump mob that stormed the US Congress to prevent the certification of Joe Biden's election victory.
Tarrio wasn't at the Capitol January 6th, having been banned from Washington, D.C. while facing a previous criminal charge. But prosecutors argue he helped orchestrate, organize, and privately claimed credit for the assault on the Capitol.
Tarrio and 4 other members of the Proud Boys were found guilty of seditious conspiracy. The others were sentenced to between 10 and 18 years in jail. 18 years also the sentence handed down, by the way, to Stuart Rhodes, the leader of the other far-right group involved, the Oath Keepers, on the same charge in May. The defence had claimed that there was no plot to stop the peaceful transfer of power, but a Washington, D.C. jury disagreed, and now their attorneys want the former president held to account.
Where's Donald Trump in all of this? He stood on the ellipse, basically told people, 74 million of his followers, the election's stolen, go to the Capitol, fight like hell or you won't have a country anymore.
Republican presidential candidates Ron DeSantis and Vivek Ramaswamy have described the sentence for Tarrio as excessive and wrong. Meanwhile, court documents have revealed that Tarrio was offered a plea deal last October, which could have seen him imprisoned for between 110 and 137 months. That's around 9 to 11 years, basically half the sentence that he is now set to serve. Should have taken the deal. Former President Trump, meanwhile, has indicated that he will consider pardoning the January 6 conspirators. He himself faces some of the same charges of obstructing an official proceeding of Congress on January 6th. That's in the case brought last month by the Special Counsel Jack Smith, Chaz.
which is why the Special Counsel hopes to use some of these cases as precedents for the trial against Trump later on. We'll see how that goes. But I do want to go back to Ron DeSantis' critique of Tarrio's sentence, because a lot of people do share his concerns. DeSantis said they may have been violent, but to say it's an act of terrorism when it was basically a protest that devolved into a riot, to do excessive sentences, and then he went on a bit. Basically, DeSantis and others thought it was a bit much to hit Tarrio with a sentence for terrorism, particularly when he wasn't even present at the Capitol on January 6th. However, the judge did find him to be the ultimate person who organised the violence. And yes, it did seem to be at least partly organised. He apparently had a blueprint for occupying federal buildings in order to block the certification of Biden's electors. Now, given that, let's have a look at the FBI's definition of terrorism. It's the unlawful use of force or violence to intimidate or coerce a government or civilian population in the furtherance of political or social objectives. That's a mouthful, which to me at least seems to describe exactly what Tarrio planned: to use violence to coerce the Senate into not certifying Biden's election. Tick, tick, tick. One thing's for sure though, all the Biden regime weaponization of justice claims out there on Twitter, etc., are garbage. This judge was a Trump appointee who previously was chief counsel for Republican Senator Chuck Grassley and is also a member of the super conservative Federalist Society. Although admittedly, John, sometimes those Federalist Society people can surprise us a little bit. Cue the next story.
Yes, indeed, Chaz. On that subject, there have been a total of 27 amendments to the United States Constitution from 1791 through to 1992. We hear a lot about the First Amendment. That's the one that protects freedoms of religion, speech and the press, as well as the right to assemble. And a lot as well is said about the Second Amendment and the right to keep and bear arms. But not so much about the 14th 14th Amendment. Until now, that is. It is Section 3 of the 14th, passed in 1866 after the end of the American Civil War, that some experts now believe will stop Donald Trump from ever being president again. It states,
"No person shall, yada, 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 hold any office, civil or military, under the United States, blah, 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 have engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the same, or given aid or comfort to the enemies, therefore of, etc., etc." Boring.
So basically, if you've sworn an oath to support the Constitution, then you've engaged in insurrection or rebellion or given aid and comfort to the American enemies, then you cannot hold any civil or military office again. That includes the presidency. It is known as the Insurrection Clause. And conservative constitutional law scholars and members of the aforementioned Federalist Society, that's William Board and Michael Stokes-Paulson, they've examined what they call the sweep and force of Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. And yada, 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 to cut a long article short, after ruling out free speech principles as a defence, and we've already heard that from the Trump camp, they conclude it disqualifies former President Donald Trump. Full stop. But not everyone agrees. Another conservative scholar and Trump defender, Jonathan Turley, has described the use of the 14th Amendment to disqualify Trump as, quote, an urban legend, writing, "Sulking in the Oval Office while his supporters attacked the Capitol does not make Trump a seditionist." Noting correctly, Special Counsel Jack Smith notably did not charge him with any such crime. Now, Trump liked that legal opinion and he reposted it on Truth Social. In fact, the 14th debate was clearly very much on the former president's mind this week, judging from his Truth feed.
Yeah, look, unlike the former president, I'm not going to weigh in on the legals of this because the Supreme Court are probably going to have their say. It's at one point in time, I've got no idea where they're going to go on this one. I'll just leave it to them. But I do want to talk a little bit about whether it will get to the Supreme Court at all. Remember, there were extensive challenges to Obama and Ted Cruz about where they were born as well a few years back. But in most of those challenges, the court never even considered the merits of those cases because they failed to clear some other legal hurdle. So, for example, 2 weeks ago, there was a huge amount of news about the first court challenge to Trump's eligibility under the 14th Amendment. Huge news. Well, that challenge has already been dismissed. Not because the theory is wrong, but because the challenger lacks standing to challenge Trump's qualifications. So what does standing mean? It means the plaintiffs must have a personal stake in the legal issue. You can't just be some rando challenging Trump's eligibility in court. Okay, fine. Let's take someone who's got a personal stake in the question. Let's say one of Trump's competitors, say Chris Christie. Could he sue? Well, even then, many states have no legal mechanism to review presidential qualifications. In fact, ineligible presidential candidates have appeared on the ballot for decades. Now, of course, left-leaning lawyers are all very well aware of this. So legal advocacy groups like CREW and FSFP began experimenting in 2022 with challenges against other candidates like, say, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Madison Cawthorn and others to see how those challenges would work. Most of those challenges were immediately dismissed. Some of them made a little bit of progress, but one completely worked. A fellow named Coy Griffin was removed from office as a county commissioner and barred from ever running for office again because of his role in the January 6th insurrection. He appealed to the state Supreme Court and he lost the appeal. So that would have given these advocacy groups a lot of useful information for their Trump challenges starting right now. But what will the Supreme Court say if it gets there? I don't know. I will say this though, it strikes me as a classic be careful what you wish for moment, John, this whole thing. Because if Trump actually was to be disqualified from even running for president, I don't want to think about the kind of candidate that furious Republicans would turn to next time round.
Yeah, well, we'll ask Bill Weld about some of that in just a tick. In other legal developments this week, though, a New York judge has ruled that as Trump is already liable for the defamation of writer E. Jean Carroll, the upcoming civil trial will only deal with the question of how much the former president should pay her in monetary damages. Trump was found guilty in May of sexually abusing Carroll in a New York department store in the 1990s, then defaming her in his denials. And then after that verdict, he defamed her again on CNN.
I have no idea who the hell. She's a whack job.
Well, the jury will decide in January what that remark should cost Trump. Also this week, Special Counsel David Weiss has announced that he will seek the indictment of the president's son, Hunter Biden. This move comes after that plea deal collapsed last month over Biden's illegal gun ownership and non-payment of taxes. Well, meanwhile, it is looking increasingly likely that the Republican majority in the House of Representatives will launch an impeachment inquiry into, well, something or another to do with Joe Biden and Ukraine and Hunter and Burisma and money and stuff. Speaker Kevin McCarthy denies, though, it would be politically motivated.
If you look at all the information we've been able to gather so far, it is a natural step forward that you would have to go to an impeachment inquiry. And just so your viewers understand what that means, that provides Congress the apex of legal power to get all the information they need.
All sounds very, very reasonable. McCarthy is reportedly trying to use the lure of an impeachment inquiry to stop his own Conservative Republicans from shutting down the government, warning that that would stall the House's ongoing inquiries into the president and his family. Unless a stopgap funding measure is approved, federal funds will stop flowing on September 30th, the end of the US fiscal year. If an impeachment inquiry did lead to a vote approving articles of impeachment, if that then would be the first time that two presidents have been impeached over the same matter. Of course, it was Donald Trump withholding military aid to Ukraine until they looked for and found dirt on Joe Biden that triggered the first of his two impeachments. And it's Donald Trump's House allies like Marjorie Taylor Greene who are pushing McCarthy to impeach Biden now.
If we were to have the vote today, right now, Kevin McCarthy would be one of the first ones to vote yes.
Well, Marge might be right about that. Kevin's going to vote for it, but do they have all the votes they need? They can only afford to lose 5 Republican votes in order to pass this. And it looks as though they don't have those numbers because a lot of Republicans are old enough to remember the last time they tried to impeach a Democratic president, one Bill Clinton, in 1998 over his affair with Monica Lewinsky. The public basically decided then Republicans had overreached and Republicans paid the price at the ballot box that November. So this is a very high-stakes game, Chaz.
Yeah, and I think Kevin McCarthy knows it too. But firstly, I should say that McCarthy's gambit that you described to keep the government open by basically using the impeachment as a hostage doesn't make a lot of sense, actually, when you think about it.
That hasn't stopped him before.
I know, but let me explain to the viewers. You see, it's Kevin McCarthy who has the authority to determine which parts of the House continue to operate during the shutdown. It's up to him whether they have the impeachment during the shutdown or not. And Conservatives know that. They're assuming that impeachment investigators will be considered essential personnel, and so they will keep working during the shutdown. So I think the impeachment is going to be happening regardless, as our House Oversight Committee Chair James Comer is all but declaring.
There's consensus in our conference now that we're going to have to go to impeachment inquiry, but I feel like we're there now, Sean. I feel like that's imminent. As
for what the impeachment's going to be about, well, I think that's clear. Check out Article 2, Section 4 of the Constitution. It's written right there. Bribery. The question is, can they prove that either Hunter or Joe Biden took payments from Hunter's buddies in order for Joe to grant them favours as vice president? Now that remains to be seen. And if they fall short, the Democrats have got their political response all teed up, ready to go with respect to Trump and Saudi Arabia.
So, the Trumps did a lot for them, and I think Donald Trump bragged about it, saying in essence he saved the prince's posterior multiple times, and he wanted to continually remind him of that. Well, we know that Jared Kushner created a business the day after the Trump administration ended, and within a few months he had brought home billions of dollars from the Saudi government.
So get ready to hear a whole lot more about the Jared Kushner comparison over the next few months, John. As for what you were saying before about this being politically treacherous territory, that is true, not just with Clinton, but if we look at Trump's first impeachment, independents' approval of Trump actually rose to 47% and then to 51% from starting in the 30s before the impeachment. And that was involving an impeachment that people were at least open to.
Right.
In this impeachment, 52% of voters are opposed to the impeachment, and only 41% are in favour of it even before it starts. So this is a risky proposition, especially since there are 19 Republican members in the House who represent districts that Biden won in 2020, and they aren't going to win re-election without winning Biden voters over. And making those blue state Republicans vote for an impeachment is not going to end well for them or for Kevin McCarthy's majority. Now, of course, Kevin McCarthy knows that, which is why he's been trying to hold off as long as he possibly can, but I don't think his base is going to let him hold off any longer.
No, but he also probably knows, Chaz, that if he is going to shut down the government, which is what his Conservative base want, while also holding an impeachment inquiry, keeping those parts of government open, while also shutting down national parks and not sending out any social security checks, that's going to be not particularly popular at all.
I think you're right.
Yeah, for more, we're joined by William Weld. He's the former Republican governor of the state of Massachusetts. He's a former Assistant Attorney General in the Reagan administration. He also served as counsel to the US House Watergate impeachment inquiry back in 1974. And in 2020, he ran for the Republican presidential nomination against Donald Trump. Bill Weld, welcome to Planet America's Fireside Chat.
My great pleasure.
So you ran against Donald Trump and you couldn't beat him in the primaries. Looking at the primaries this time around, can you see anybody in that field that can beat him?
Oh, sure. I mean, it depends a little bit what happens with these court cases, and I'll get to that in a minute. But I think Mike Pence, I think Nikki Haley could definitely do it, depending on the impact of these criminal cases. I'd love to see Tim Scott do well. I see he was third in Iowa. Love to see a black man do well in the Republican Party. I'm old friends with Governor Hutchinson. We served together in the Justice Department. He's a very straight arrow. There are plenty of good Republicans out there. DeSantis could win. He's not disqualified by anything that's happened to date. I think Vivek is a creature of Trump, and I think anyone who's a creature of Trump is going absolutely nowhere after these two Jack Smith cases run their course in the court system. By Jack Smith, I mean the public integrity section of the Justice Department.
So what is your sense of these cases that are being mounted against Donald Trump now? Do you see any of them as presenting an obstacle to his potential re-election?
Oh, sure. I think both of the cases brought by the public integrity section by Jack Smith will have that effect. One you may think of as just the Mar-a-Lago documents case, 4 counts. I think they're 20-year felonies. The indictment doesn't read well for Trump. It has Trump talking to his lawyers and his helpers day by day, even minute by minute. Okay, guys, now you hide this behind this sofa and put this in the sink behind this new document holder that we should wheel in front of it. And after you got everything hidden, make sure you go and tell the FBI that we've already given them everything we've been able to find. Now you read that and it's devastating because it's obvious that 25 other people are talking and not Donald Trump. That's why it doesn't read well for him. So, and the other case, the conspiracy to defraud the U.S. government, I've been talking for 2 years about how what will bring Mr. Trump down is 18 U.S. Code Section 371, which is conspiracy against the United States. And if killing the vice president and threatening the death of the Speaker of the House isn't committing a conspiracy against the United States, then I don't know what does.
And Governor, what do you think about this 14th Amendment sort of academic legal debate that's going on at the moment? Do you think that that could disqualify Donald Trump from serving again?
You know, I don't think that one gets all the way there. I mean, the 14th Amendment, let's remember, came out of the Civil War, and it was an anti-Confederacy statute. When they said insurrection, they knew exactly what they were talking about. You know, if you look in the Constitution, which I carry with me at all times, for the definition of who can run for president, all it says is you got to be 35 years old and for 14 years a resident of the United States. It doesn't say if you were an insurrectionist. This is in the Constitution, which I'm holding up, that you cannot ever have committed insurrection against the United States. So I think that one fails, just to show I'm not always on the anti-Trump side.
And given the very tight time frames, the potential for appeals, maybe the involvement of the Supreme Court of the United States, do you expect any of these cases will be resolved for voters to then be able to make an informed decision next November?
Oh, sure. I think the court system will make sure that somewhere between January and the end of April of 2024, you'll have an end at the trial level. And if Mr. Trump is sentenced to the 100 years in prison that he could be in the 18 U.S. Code 371 case, you won't really need to wait for the appeal period to run. I think people will just say, okay, well, that's tarnished goods, more than tarnished, and so we're just not going to vote for him. And I think gradually his support is just going to fall away because it just doesn't make any sense to elect someone who's facing 130 years in prison when you don't have to.
I wonder how can you be confident, though, after everything that Teflon Don has managed to endure, that Republican voters will draw the line as a result of criminal convictions?
Well, I suppose nobody can be certain, but Trump's outrageous conduct and not only inability to conform his behavior to any requirements of law, but a willful inclination not to thumb his nose at the law. That's one thing, and maybe the fellow who was just sentenced to 22 years in prison, the Proud Boys guy, maybe he got a chuckle out of the 22-year sentence, but somehow I don't think so. His lawyer pleaded for mercy on the ground that he didn't know what he was doing, and he was just a foot soldier, and Donald Trump was the general. But I imagine that Ronald Tario is not feeling good right now. And I think a realistic person casting a vote doesn't want to cast it for someone who has either facing or has already been sentenced to over 100 years in prison.
Meanwhile, Bill Weld, it does look increasingly likely that a Republican House impeachment inquiry into President Joe Biden is going to be launched within the next few weeks. What is your view on that? Is it appropriate?
Well, I consider that a Hunter Biden case, not really a Joe Biden case. I've known Joe Biden for 30 years, and I think he's always been a complete straight shooter. Having said that, I think Hunter has behaved very badly, moving in with Beau Biden's widow, then leaving her for nobody. And then I had not gotten into the details of some of his foreign business dealings until recently. Those dollar signs are quite large. Hunter made no bones about trying to trade in on Joe Biden's name.
We've also seen news this week, Governor, that Hunter Biden is being indicted, or he's going to be indicted on those gun charges. There have been accusations from both sides of political pressure being brought to bear. What do you think of that? Is this a fair process?
Well, I thought the plea deal was mezzo-mezzo. He didn't have to go to jail. They gave him such and such consideration on the gun deals. I thought his counsel did a pretty good job getting that. Of course, then it fell apart when they had the hearing. So yeah, I think both sides are at the highest levels willing to play politics, if you will, with this one. Certainly, the Republicans, as a political matter, they're going to go after it. And the Oversight Committee, I think it was Representative Comer, had some words recently, and they weren't really over the top. They just wanted to make sure that there wasn't a big thumb on the scales of justice here coming from the Justice Department. And I think that's a legitimate inquiry.
Governor Bill Weld, great to talk to you. Thanks for being with us on Planet America's Fireside Chat.
Thanks so much, John.
Monday was Labor Day. And you know what that means?
Gun, Labor Day marks the traditional start to campaign season.
So what did we start 6 weeks ago?
I've been asking myself the same question for about 6 weeks.
Anyway, this has been a big week for Biden, both positive and negative. Let's start with the positive. For 20 years, American politicians have been trying to reduce the cost of prescription drugs in America. The problem is that America's Medicare, by law, is not allowed to negotiate drug prices with pharmaceutical companies. And that's not the case for other countries, which is why America pays between 2 to 6 times as much as other countries do for brand name medicines. And if you want to know how much America would save if this wasn't the case, just look at the Department of Veterans Affairs, because they're allowed to negotiate. According to a Government Accountability Office report, they pay an average of 54% less per unit than Medicare does. That is a big number. And pharmaceutical companies are very pleased with this scenario because America is responsible for 65% of the world's contribution to pharmaceutical company profits. But somehow, despite one of the largest barrages of congressional lobbying in history, $700 million across 2021 and 2022, that is also a big number. And by the way, that is more than the second and third ranking industries combined. Somehow, the Democrats managed to push reform through Congress, and now Medicare will begin to be able to negotiate the prices of some drugs. First, 10 drugs, then next year, 15 more drugs, then 15 more after that, then 20 per year from then on. Sure, those discounts are not even going to begin to kick in until 2026, but this is still huge. Now, you might think that 2026 thing sounds a bit lame, but even the first 10 drugs alone account for 20% of the spending in the Medicare prescription drug program. Let's look at the cheapest of these drugs, and they're totally unpronounceable names in that first column. The second column is what the drugs treat. Then that there is the price Medicare pays per month for these drugs, and then that's what the Australian government pays per month for those drugs, converted to US dollars. Now, you can see American Medicare pays 3 to 20 times as much as the Australian government pays for the same drugs. Importantly, American people may not pay those full Medicare prices in the third column, depending on their insurance coverage. But Australian people will also not pay what our government pays either. The Australian people actually pay $30 Australian for each of those medicines. That's $19 American. Quite a difference. And I've left off the most expensive drugs on that list as well. There is a $25,000 psoriasis drug on the list that the Australian government pays $2,500 for, and Australian people pay $30 for it. The fact is, lame or not, these reforms will reduce prices for 9 million American seniors who currently pay as much as $6,500 in out-of-pocket costs per year for those drugs. Oh, and for all the other drugs, they're going to put a $2,000 cap on out-of-pocket costs. So, John, that's big.
It is. Absolutely. This is probably the biggest reform to America's healthcare system since the passage of Obamacare.
Yep.
And the sad news for Joe Biden is, even though this will be in the top paragraph of his political obituary, what did you get done as president, Joe? It won't help him a jot politically because, as you say, these price cuts don't come in until 2026, well and truly after the next election.
Sadly, that is correct. On to the second item. About a year ago, Biden asked the health secretary to review how marijuana is scheduled, because until now, marijuana was classified as a Schedule 1 drug, which means that it has no currently accepted medical use and has a high potential for abuse. Examples of Schedule 1 drugs include heroin, LSD, and ecstasy. That's obviously not true in the case of marijuana. It has a lot of medical uses, say, for example, easing multiple sclerosis symptoms. And so this week, the health secretary responded to Biden by calling for marijuana to be rescheduled as a Schedule 3 drug. Now that means drugs with a moderate to low potential for physical and psychological dependence. They include Tylenol with codeine, ketamine, steroids, and testosterone. So Schedule 3 sounds about right to me personally, and the Drug Enforcement Agency is going to weigh in this on as well. Of course, they still have to make their call before marijuana is officially rescheduled to Schedule 3. But let's say that happens next year, which is what's projected. What does that mean? Well, marijuana is still going to be banned in non-legalising states, but rescheduling would remove the super high tax rates that marijuana businesses currently pay. It would finally allow scientific research to be conducted on the medical benefits of weed, which wasn't possible for a Schedule 1 drug, and it would allow the FDA to approve medical marijuana formally, leading to a more regulated medical marijuana industry, which would give the American people many more options for medical treatment with marijuana. It wouldn't be legal drugs everywhere, but it would be a lot more reasonable system than they currently have.
Yeah, and look, we've got this crazy situation where literally tennis matches on Court 17 at Flushing Meadows in the US Open are being interrupted by pot smoke wafting in from the park next door, and yet it's a Schedule 1 drug. And because it frees it up for more research, that also means for those who are concerned about the negative side effects of some particularly high density, hydroponic sort of pot, they will also be able to get a clearer insight into the risks of psychosis and amplification of other illnesses as well. So it does sound like a good news story all round.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. But so that's the positives. Now some negatives. The deficit didn't just go up this year, it doubled this year. Now, sure, no one seems to care about deficits anymore for some reason, but still, a 7.6% of GDP deficit is not good. That hasn't occurred before other than during World War II, the GFC and the pandemic. Not even the Great Depression saw deficits that large. Now, I don't know if that's going to become a campaign issue or not. No one seems to care, as I said. I don't know why. But I'll tell you what will definitely become a campaign issue. Border apprehensions have risen more than 30% for 2 consecutive months. But most concerningly, this month, Border Patrol arrested 91,000 migrants who crossed as part of a family group. That's an all-time record. The previous record was under the Trump administration. The problem with this is that when you arrest these families, the kids are forced to spend a certain amount of time in a windowless, grimy detention cell. And you might recall, people did not like that very much the last time that got out of control. This is exactly the kind of problem, John, that the media just ignores until it doesn't.
Yeah.
And then it becomes a very big problem very quickly. And by then, it's too late to fix it quickly. So that might be one to watch, I reckon.
Yeah, it certainly is. Good to see this week as well on that, Chaz, that a judge has ruled that those physical floating barriers that had been placed down the middle of the Rio Grande, which were literally catching people like a shark net and drowning them, they have been ordered to be removed. So there is that at least. Joe Biden is preparing to face the American voters for one last time after nearly half a century in public office. He made history in 2020 as the oldest person ever elected to the presidency at 77, and Biden is already the only person to serve in the office into their 80s. And now his age is certainly an issue, possibly the biggest one, standing in the way of his possible re-election next year. During the 2020 presidential campaign, Donald Trump tried to make an issue of Joe Biden's age.
The president has been making an issue of his opponent Joe Biden's mental fitness for office.
Let's not kid ourselves. Joe is shot, okay? He's shot. Sleepy Joe Biden, who has no clue what the hell he's doing.
We need help to beat Sleepy Joe Biden? I don't think so.
Turns out he did. Trump even took a cognitive test of his own.
Person, woman, man, camera, TV. If you get it in order, you get extra points.
And he went on and on about that test.
We aced it. I think I can say that I aced it.
Did he get one? He didn't get one question wrong, did he? 30 out of 30. Yeah. Wow.
But remember, this was the same guy who faked his own medical report.
Released during the campaign, it stated that Trump's, quote, physical strength and stamina are extraordinary, and that he would be, quote, the healthiest individual ever elected to the presidency. Bornstein says Trump dictated the words and the doctor wrote them.
Meanwhile, Biden's campaign tried to emphasize his vigor.
Some people are always in a hurry. They run when they could walk. Race up steps when others take it slow. When Joe Biden's president, America is just going to have to keep up.
Trump is just 3 years younger than Joe Biden. Perhaps that's why he's so keen to make an issue of it again.
I'm running for president. Where am I going? Where the hell am I going? I want to get out. Oh.
Polls show that voters are concerned about both men's ages. 65% say Biden is too old for another term as president. 45% say Trump is too old.
We have an 80-year-old man begging us for 4 more years of work.
So, what lessons can Joe Biden take from the oldest American president to ever successfully run for re-election?
So far, it is almost a totally clean sweep for Reagan.
That electoral landslide for America's 40th president, Ronald Reagan, in 1984 came despite questions over the 73-year-old's ability to do the job. Barely 2 months after taking office in 1981, a would-be assassin's bullet had very nearly ended Reagan's life.
He was wounded. God, the president was hit.
The seriousness of Reagan's injuries were downplayed at the time.
His condition is stable. A decision is now being made whether or not to operate to remove the bullet.
Reagan had been hit under his left arm by a bullet that ricocheted off his presidential limousine. It ripped through his lungs, causing a nearly fatal internal bleed. But the official line was, nothing to worry about.
He's emerged from this experience with flying colors and with the most optimistic prospects for a complete recovery.
And to prove it, Reagan was seen riding horses, pitching baseballs.
Now let's watch his pitch. High and inside.
And perhaps most importantly, Reagan made a lot of jokes about his own age.
I can still remember my first Republican convention. Abraham Lincoln giving a speech that sent tingles down my spine.
And already we can see Joe Biden taking a leaf out of Reagan's playbook. Instead of riding horses, though, it's a mountain bike.
Morning, Mr. President.
Although, maybe he should get a horse. And the age jokes are there too.
Think about it. I know I'm 198 years old.
After all, I believe in the First Amendment. Not just because my good friend Jimmy Madison wrote it.
Gags aside, like Reagan, Joe Biden understands getting credit for a strong economy is probably the key to winning a second term. That and neutralising the doubts about his age.
I've acquired a hell of a lot of wisdom. I know more than the vast majority of people. I'm more experienced than anybody's ever run for the office. And I think I've proven myself to be honourable as well as also effective.
But for Reagan in 1984, there was a crucial moment where his age did become a big issue. In his first debate against his presidential rival, Democrat Walter Mondale. He was a former senator and vice president under Jimmy Carter. 56 years old, Mondale was match fit after a tough primary campaign, while Reagan was off his game.
The system is still where it was with regard to the progressivity, as I've said.
Reagan's personal physician probably didn't help matters, noting that the president was, quote, tired. 2 weeks later, Reagan again faced Mondale, and the inevitable question was asked.
You already are the oldest president in history, and some of your staff say you were tired after your most recent encounter with Mr. Mondale. I recall yet that President Kennedy had to go for days on end with very little sleep during the Cuba Missile Crisis. Is there any doubt in your mind that you would be able to function in such circumstances?
Reagan, of course, a former Hollywood actor, was prepared with what was clearly a rehearsed line, but he delivered it to perfection.
I will not make age an issue of this campaign. I am not going to exploit, for political purposes, my opponent's youth and inexperience.
Mondale laughed, but later said that was the moment he knew he had lost the election. Humour had diffused a very serious issue. Reagan's campaign sailed towards victory and 4 more years in the White House. 5 years after he left office, though, it was announced that Reagan had Alzheimer's disease. Some experts and even members of his own family now believe that Reagan was showing the early signs of dementia while he was president, from the time of that assassination attempt. Joe Biden was older on the day he took office than Reagan was on the day he left office. So this issue is not going away. He'll make gaffes, he'll maybe put in a bad debate performance or two. The question is whether Joe Biden has the skill and the wit to win doubters over. Quick check of some polls for you now, and the Trump camp will have been very happy with a Wall Street Journal poll out this week, putting the former president in a dominant position still over his Republican rivals nationally. Interesting to see there, Nikki Haley is moving into third after her strong debate showing, and Vivek Ramaswamy annoying everybody. And head-to-head, it is a tie with Joe Biden and Donald Trump. But put in the progressive academic Cornel West into that mix, and West drains enough support to give Donald Trump the lead. And that would be a growing concern in Biden land right now, even if there's a chance that people think that they're talking about Kanye West, but I'm not sure.
I reckon the third party issue may be the biggest concern at Biden land right now.
Yeah.
I think it's a real problem for them. But anyway, we should say that Wall Street Journal poll was conducted by Republican pollster Tony Fabrizio, in a partnership with a Democrat colleague, I might emphasise. But we should note that nevertheless, because Fabrizio was the chief pollster on Trump's 2016 campaign, and Trump's super PAC has paid Fabrizio's company over $500,000 this year in consultancy fees. But polling experts don't have a problem with this poll at all.
No, Fabrizio is well regarded in the sector, not a partisan hack.
And the results do seem to be in keeping with every other poll I've seen as well. Anyway. But the most positive primary poll I've seen wasn't from that one anyway for Trump. It was actually from Morning Consult. They found 62% of potential primary voters said that they think Trump has the best chance of beating Biden. That was 9 points higher after his latest indictment. Now, if that's true, then that would be game over for the primary, because there'd be no coming back from those kinds of numbers. But let's go back to the Wall Street Journal poll for a second, because there was a stat there that really caught my eye. More voters saw Trump rather than Biden as having a record of accomplishments as president. 40% said Biden had more accomplishments and 51% said Trump did. Now, it's rare to have two presidents going up against each other with a track record, but in this case we do. So comparing their track record might be important in the election. But I do emphasise that this is the end of year 3, when presidents traditionally are at their weakest. Yep. We should bear that in mind with polls.
The honeymoon's over, the re-elect campaign yet to get underway?
Exactly. For example, to illustrate what I'm talking about, you might be surprised how Biden's approval rating right now compares to Obama's at the same point of his presidency. Biden's approval is hovering just above 40%. It's kind of pathetic, but it's still higher than Obama's was at the exact same point. In fact, this was the first time in Obama's entire presidency he had a lower approval rating than Biden does at the same point. Now, I don't know if Biden's going to be able to turn things around the same way Obama did over his last 12 months, but it's still worth considering when people are doing the doom and gloom. Presidents have come back from this before.
Well, sure, September 2011, that was when Rick Perry looked like being the Republican nominee. So a lot could change. And look, the big difference now is we haven't had a situation where a former president is running in a competitive primary in this way. It has literally never happened before. So we don't know whether Trump's sky-high numbers are an illusion or just a lock. But in the meanwhile, because second place Ron DeSantis is showing weakness himself, there's no motivation for Nikki Haley, Mike Pence, Vivek Ramaswamy or anybody else to say, let's get out of the way and make this a two-horse race. Because two-horse race, Trump could still potentially be beaten. He could be forced below 50% in a lot of states and a lot of polls. Hypothetically, if everybody who's not supporting Trump now supports somebody else. But there's no chance of that, whatever DeSantis looks as weak as he does today.
That's absolutely true. And look, one thing is definitely the case is that everything that's happening with Trump and Biden is a first.
Yep.
You just can't compare to Obama, you can't compare to anyone.
Yeah.
Everything's a first.
Much as I love my American political history, history is no guide. These are uncharted waters. But now, Tucker Carlson was making headlines again this week for these comments on the Adam Carolla podcast.
You know, in 2008, it became really clear that Barack Obama had been having sex with men and smoking crack. And a guy came forward, Larry Sinclair, and said, I'll sign an affidavit. And he did. I'll take a lie detector. And he did. I smoked crack with Barack Obama and had sex with him. Well, that was obviously true.
You wouldn't want to take that last sentence out of context, Tucker.
I just can't believe, how did we miss that story? That's huge. The former Fox star followed up that extraordinary assertion with an interview on the former Twitter with the aforementioned Larry Sinclair, who does claim he did drugs and had sex with then State Senator Barack Obama in Chicago a quarter of a century ago.
As I'm doing a line, I just start, this is the part where you kind of make your move to see where things are going. So I just started rubbing my hand along his thigh to see where it was going, and it went the direction I had intended it to go. So the night became somewhat active sexually and drug-wise in the limo.
Tucker clearly seems to believe Larry Sinclair, who first made these claims in 2008 during Obama's first presidential campaign. Larry rented a room at the National Press Club to tell his story to the media, who basically didn't believe him. Now he has written a whole book about the affair, which is selling on Amazon, a paperback, for just $541 per copy.
Bargain.
Must be good. So, is it obviously true, as Tucker Carlson says? Well, I don't know, Chaz. I wasn't there, but chances are Barack Obama wasn't there either, because Larry Sinclair is a con artist. He's got a rap sheet as long as your arm, a 27-year criminal record with a specialty in crimes involving deceit. By the time he first made these claims about Obama in 2008, he was once sentenced to 16 years in prison for forgery and stealing someone's tax refund. Tucker makes a lot of the fact that Sinclair has signed an affidavit, a sworn statement, and that he passed a lie detector test. Well, that's not what the organisers of the lie detector test say. They say that Larry's results indicated deception And that affidavit also claimed that Sinclair was terminally ill in 2008. So that is a 15-year terminal illness, Chaz. He's a fighter. You can say that about him. He's a fighter.
Looking great for a skeleton, I have to say. Look, I hate these stories, John. I really do, because you can't disprove them 100%, but they are so incredibly unlikely. For example, Larry Sinclair back in 2008 said he had phone records that verified at least part of his story. Now, has anyone bothered to check those phone records? I don't know. I can't find it on the internet. I'll tell you, though, I don't believe him, and I'll tell you why, apart from all the points that you just made. Yep. Also, Barack Obama's biographers are unanimous on how careful he was from a young age to try and build his own mythology, right? He clearly had his eyes on the prize quite early on. So in 1999, when he was already a politician, what are the chances that he'd give Larry Sinclair his real name when doing drugs and having sex with him, which is what Larry Sinclair claims?
Yeah, look, it's possible some other guy said, hey, pleased to meet you, my name's Barack Obama, outside a gay nightclub. That could have happened, maybe.
Yeah, look, all I'll say is this. Not only do I not believe him, I disagree with you. I don't think Tucker Carlson believes him either, despite how he was acting. I'll tell you why. Because Tucker Carlson started his own publication back in 2010 called The Daily Caller. Now, at that point in time, Obama was president, and these allegations were relatively fresh.
Yep.
Do you know how many times the Daily Caller covered these relevant, fresh allegations?
Huge story. It must have been every single day.
0!
Oh.
So I don't think even Tucker Carlson believes these claims. But while we're talking Tucker, if you don't mind, do you remember how Tucker's interview with Trump was?
The single most watched video and interview in the history of the world, I guess.
It's even a big call by Trump standards. Now, that was the biggest video in the history of the world because, according to X, it had 263 million views. But these are special Elon views. They include any user who scrolls past the video, even if they don't watch it for 1 split second. Now, given that Elon Musk has 155 million followers, if he even tweets out a video that 0 people watch, it would still get tens of millions of views by his definition, and he did tweet out that interview. But before Elon changed the definition of an X view, the definition of a view used to be when you watch a video for more than 2 seconds. Now, that's still not a real view.
Not a particularly in-depth interview at that stage.
No, but it's better than Elon's definition. Oh. But let's just take that definition, the 2 seconds, right? It turns out that some people can access the video under the old rules, and they found under the 2-second viewing definition, the Trump-Tucker interview has actually had 21 million views, about 8% as many, and emphasising that's 2 seconds. So the real views would be way less than that. Now that is not the biggest video of all time. In fact, those numbers are barely viral. That's the same number of views as this fight, which took place mostly off camera, got. And to be fair, that almost visible fight is compelling viewing to me, but not sure it's an all-timer.
All right, play the sting.
That's a bunch of malarkey.
Now, before we go, Chaz, remember last week when you had to make a correction over something that Vivek Ramaswamy had said or not said in the debate?
Do I ever remember? I was wrong. So let's not make a big deal out of it, but it wasn't great. Guys, is that necessary? Completely unnecessary.
I don't know. Well, look, last week I said in Australia it is only a convention that state premiers should replace senators with somebody from the party the previous senator represented, unlike parts of the United States we're talking about where it's basically up to the governor to decide, and they often put in somebody from their party, not the retiring or dead senator. I was thinking back to the whole thing with Sir Joh Bjelke-Petersen and Vince Gare as a part of the dismissal of the Whitlam government in 1975.
Sure.
Well, some clever viewers noted that the law in Australia was changed after that in 1977 to stop it happening again. So my apologies for that, and thank you very much for the correction.
What? I demand a graphic recall. That's garbage.
Nicely done. That is it for another trip to Planet America.
We're going to be back at the same time next week, or on iView, Facebook and YouTube. And don't forget my podcast, Pep, for so much more nerdy US politics goodness. Also,
whoa, Chaz, we have a 12-plug limit on this program. To take us out, though, we do have the world's hottest rap sensation.
It's AI Trump. See you later.
I don't bail, I won't see inside a cell. Shut up, thugger, free my slime, slat, YSL. They tryna lock me up, but I'm plugged in ATL. Got homies doing life in jail, they living in hell. These DAs acting silly, my mugshot is worth a billy. So some merchant made a milli, shot McMillie out in Philly. Shot the baby, shot the Sosa, Benny Butcher, them my rollers. Called me racist, but these rappers riding with me, them my soldiers. MAGA, I am not who